Hello everybody and welcome to the NRL round recap where I, a pest, recap the round that is NRL. We're up to round 3 already. We had so much football, or lack of football thereof actually, in the off season, and now it's just getting too much. So without further ado, let's get straight into the rounds. So the opening match saw the Manly Sea Eagles hosting the Parramatta Eels, and one thing I must say in this game was there was a lot of hype going into it. Obviously, Manly were coming off their first win of the season and obviously had the week's rest, whilst Parramatta were coming into this game 0-2. And realistically, that's kind of how the game played out. The first half, Manly came out firing. They were actually going really well. Parramatta did end up making a comeback, which made the game a little bit more interesting. Actually, very close. Like, there was a potential chance there of Parramatta actually getting the win there at Brookvale, because it has happened a couple of times over the last year or so. I think, remember specifically when Manly played the Cowboys, and almost when Manly played Melbourne last year. But Manly were able to hang on, so they are 2-0 to start the season, and Parramatta, obviously after their grand final last year, are now currently 0-3 for the start of the season. Though I still think it's like one of those unfortunate things, like Parramatta worked themselves up. They scored 30 points but still didn't end up winning the match. So I still think they will make the 8. Parramatta personally, it's just, you know, things happen. Like, I don't know. Parramatta haven't really had the best of schedules. I mean, you had the Melbourne Storm, which are always going to be competitive, and then round 2 they took on the Sharks. So you still, you know, one team made the finals, the other team came second and still made the finals, and now they've played round 3. I think it's a team that is currently on some very good momentum. I think Parramatta should be fine, but give it a couple of weeks, say around Easter, and if they're still in this kind of situation, that's when alarm bells should start ringing. Now we go into the next match, and we go to the Newcastle Knights up against the redacted Dolphins. They're not Redcliffe. But this was actually a game I went to. This is the first NRL game of the season that I went to. One thing I will find that was interesting, you know, the like the fins, like the foam fingers, but they're actually just the fins. They were given out. They were handed out at the front of the stadium. It's kind of goes into my working theory that no one is actually a Dolphins fan. They're all paid actors and bots and Western spy. Obviously, it was 36-20 in favour of the Dolphins, and the Knights have gotten their second loss of the season. Honestly, I don't think the Knights played that badly. Like, we were still in the game up until the last couple of minutes when the Dolphins eventually ran away with it. But the Knights, I think, within the circumstances, actually did fairly well. Like, I think there was just a couple of mistakes that some players were making, which just kind of cost us in the end. But I just see everybody's like, and I will say, like, people who have watched me know that I can be very critical of the Newcastle Knights, but generally even I'm seeing there is some bits of optimism. Like, into the interchange, obviously there was 3 players making their debut. They all did fairly well when they came on. Dylan Lucas impressed me very well in his game, was making a few key tackles right near the end of the match. But I think the Knights should be okay. I mean, I don't think they're going to make the. I don't think they're going to make the finals. I didn't think they were going to make it at the beginning of this year, anyways. But I don't really see them in this so-called wooden spoon battle. I honestly don't. Maybe like around like that 12th area, something around there. But obviously the Dolphins, they're 3-0 to start the season, and that's got all of their fans excited because, like I said, not real. But obviously we'll set up a very interesting clash next week when they play Brisbane, which will be interesting because they're hyping this up as could be potentially bigger than the Rabbitohs and the Roosters. Yes, maybe. Maybe if they, you know, developed it over 100 and so years and have the NRL not really force this as a rivalry, because besides from the Rabbitohs and Roosters, there aren't really any rivalries that are actually organic. Drop that. That's a little bit of fire there for you. But then fairness, it's like if it's weird. It's like, you know, pretty much every team that plays in Sydney against each other is a whole like rivalry, but you know, it's whatever. Now we go into the final game on Friday, and it is of course the Battle of Allianz 2 Electric Boogaloo. It was the Roosters against the Rabbitohs. Talking about it, obviously the longest running rivalry in Australian Rugby League. Unless, I don't know, fucking League were formed before, I don't know. But, very close game, very physical, kind of how it was expected to play out. But, I thought, in fairness, Rabbitohs, brilliant start. I thought they were going to run away with this game, but something just didn't happen. Well, something did happen. The Roosters came back. And then the Rabbitohs were making a good bit of late charge, but it's just fell short. But I think it was a good win by the Roosters. Obviously, had a bit of a shaky start when they took on the Dolphins in round 1. Did get a fairly scrappy win against the Warriors in round 2. But this game is showing that, like, yes, they are going to be somewhat contentive. I still think Souths are going to be as well. Latrell, obviously, there's like all the images about him because of he missed a very audacious field goal to try to tie the game. But yeah, I think both teams are going to go very well this year. But I mean, fair play to the Roosters for coming back and kind of strangle-holding the game, in fairness. Now we go into the first game on Saturday, and we go to the Gold Coast Titans up against the Melbourne Storm. Why is it every time, well, not every time, this has happened one other occasion, where these two teams have a very high-scoring game and the Titans win it? It's 38-34, almost relatively similar when they played, I think it's Suncorp a couple of years ago. It was something like very high-scoring, Melbourne scoring 34 points and still not winning the game. That's got to be up there in one of the highest. But I will say, very good performance by the Titans. I mean, there was obviously a fair amount of doubts going in with the Melbourne team. Obviously, they did come off a bit of a shellacking against the Canterbury Bulldogs in Melbourne, and then they went up to the Gold Coast. But I think the Gold Coast went really well. I actually, I know I didn't make a tips video, but I actually did think that, like, yeah, I was like, I didn't like lock it to my mates, but it was like, the Titans will beat the Melbourne Storm, and they ended up doing it. Still very too close, but yeah, it was a good game. You gotta start getting to the question, maybe or not, if the Melbourne Storm will make the 8. I still think they will be very close, but again, you're starting to see progress with the Titans, and it's like, you could actually kind of start making a case of all of the Queensland teams making the 8. I don't know if that's the first time that's been thrown around, but that could be a possibility. Obviously, there is one team that still needs to be discussed in that situation, who are currently not residing in the 8, but it's still very early doors. But yeah, very good win by the Titans. Very unfortunate for Melbourne scoring all those points and still not walking away with the 2 points. And speaking of that Queensland team, it is the North Queensland Cowboys up against the New Zealand Warriors. I watched the Warriors game against the Roosters, and I'm like, I think the Warriors are actually, like, oh, Warriors are all right. Now they go to North Queensland and, like, win and play very well. It is kind of nuts to think about, actually. It's, the Warriors might make the finals. I don't know. It's still very early doors, but the Cowboys have been a bit weird recently. It's like, if we talk about like teams being like hungover after a grand final, it's like the Cowboys are kind of prelim hungover. Obviously, they did win round 1 against Canberra, but that was when they were up 18-0 and then almost blew it. But then obviously they got the field goal and sealed the game. But I think this is just showing that this is a very good culture going on at the Warriors at the moment, and it's like, all the things the fans have been saying about them, well, their fans for years, and it's like, now it's finally starting to come in fruition. They actually start to look like a decent team. I still don't think they're going to make the 8 yet. I'm not convinced yet, but there are very good signs coming through, and I think the Cowboys can pick themselves up. I think they should be fine, but yeah, there's some things that do need to be fixed and addressed when it comes to the Cowboys going into round 4. Now we're going to the final game on Saturday, and it was, of course, the Brisbane Broncos up against the St. George Illawarra Dragons. This game was very close, which was weird, and then all of a sudden, the wheels fell off for St. George, and Brisbane just went roughshod. But I'm not, what we'll say though, obviously in those bits, there are good signs for the Dragons. Obviously, everyone, including myself, did put the Dragons at last place. But yeah, they've been playing all right. I mean, they got their win in round 2 against the Gold Coast. It was kind of interesting actually because the Dragons were like 4th, but they only played 1 game, which was rather funny. But again, it's just the Broncos are just kind of showing that they're on this good momentum at the moment, obviously coming off a win against the Cowboys last week. The only thing I'm a little bit concerned about is something similar to the extent of what happened at the end of last year for the Broncos. I mean, very good signs by all, really. It's still think the Dragons are going to get the bottom 4. But I don't know. It's weird. I do think the Broncos will make the 8. I mean, they should. But now with that win, both technically Brisbane teams, because the Dolphins aren't located anywhere, because you can't say Redcliffe, because Redcliffe is a naughty word. But yeah, the Dolphins and the Dolphins. Did I say Dolphins? The Broncos and the Dolphins. My God. The Broncos. But now, of course, the Broncos and the Dolphins will be playing each other in round 4. Both teams undefeated. Someone's going to lose. I have a feeling it'll be a draw. Now we go into the first game on the Sunday. It was the Canterbury Bulldogs up against the West Tigers at Belmore. Bulldogs looked very comfortable, and I think it was a bit of their detriment leading up in the second half. I think the Bulldogs went really well, ran roughshod against the Tigers, and then the Tigers decided to score about 3 unanswered tries in about 4 minutes to make the game what should have been a one-sided affair into, oh, the Tigers could actually steal this here. It's weird to say the least. Obviously, the Tigers now 0-3 in similar vein as kind of was last year. But they have got some positive signs. It's just, you got to think about if they just made that comeback a little bit more earlier, or they were more competitive in the periods where the Bulldogs just dominated, they could have had this win. But yep, the Bulldogs did get the win. They're 2 in a row now. But what I will say is, to complete honesty, if I was a Bulldogs fan, I'd kind of treat this as a loss, because they just left the door completely wide open, and within like the blink of an eye, it was one-sided, went from one-sided to like, oh, the Tigers, it could go down to the wire, which it did. But unfortunately, the Tigers just kept making mistakes, so it couldn't really be sealed. And finally, we go into the final match of the round, and it was the Canberra Raiders up against the Cronulla Sharks. Both teams were coming off relatively close games, as the Cronulla Sharks were in a close battle with Parramatta, and the Raiders went down in a very close game against the Dolphins in Redcliffe. Well, you can't call them that. You can really see that it's really annoying me that you can't just call them Redcliffe. But all in all, relatively close game. Corey Horsburgh, who is one of my favourite players, who doesn't play for the Knights, getting a double. Very good to see. And yeah, it was a close game. Very enjoyable match. And Canberra won, which is, I mean, it's impressive to say the least, obviously. Like, Canberra squeaked into the finals and beat Melbourne. Their forward pack, I gotta say, I think Canberra's forward pack is arguably the most underrated in the comp. Like, you've got absolute units, even down to the bench. Was worried a little bit about their backs, but I think they're starting to look fine. It's going to start gelling together. I think it was probably just one of those off games for the Cronulla Sharks. But yeah, to say the least, it is going to be interesting to see how the rest of the season does turn out after the first 3 rounds. So there we go. That is the end of the round recap. What did you guys think from this round? Who do you think is going to improve? Who do you think is going to go worse? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you very much all for watching, and I'll see you all later.